Welcome to the Adoptee Thoughts Podcast. I am your host, Melissa Guida-Richards, an author, adoptee, and mom. Each week, we will delve into the nuances of adoption, as well as tips for how to bring up difficult discussions in your adoptive family. And most importantly, we will not shy away from tough topics. So thanks for joining me today, and let's jump into your weekly dose of Adoptee Thoughts. Can you please introduce yourself?
All right, my name is Christine Heimann, and I am a Korean adoptee, and I was adopted at 6 months old from South Korea into a all-white family living in Minnesota.
Can you please tell me a little bit more about your experience being an adoptee and a little bit about your adoption story, if you don't mind?
Sure. So as an adoptee, I didn't really think much about my adoption story until I was a teenager. And that was because I started meeting more adoptees. And as I started reflecting more about my adoption story, I started looking more at who I was as both an adoptee and as a person of color. So growing up, though, my mom, she would always say, like, if you wanted to talk about adoption, you could. And so she would say, here's your papers. And so I always knew my adoption story. So it was, kind of, I guess you could call your quote unquote stereotypical adoption story from Korea of a single mom who didn't have the means to raise me, and also just because of the social stigma of Koreans to single moms. That's why she made the adoption plan for me. So I always knew that, but I didn't really have any interest in looking more into my Korean heritage, Korean culture, or my adoption story until I think I was about 14 years old. And again, that's when I started meeting more adoptees, and they had already looked more into their adoption stories and had connected more with Korean culture, and I kind of just got sucked into that. And because of that, I became more curious about who I was and where I came from.
How did you meet other adoptees? Did you go to a culture camp, or how did you make that connection?
In my school, but it's not like we talked about adoption in my school. But in high school, one of my first friends that I met, and I still talk to this day, she's a Korean adoptee, and and so just
nice.
Right off the bat, it was, hey, who are you? Oh, my name is Christine. Oh, okay. And oh, well, you don't look like, your name is, Christine. And then that ultimately led to, oh, are you adopted? Yes, I'm adopted. And then, kind of one of those stories. And and then she was really involved with just the adoption community and Korean culture. And so she led me to do Korean dance and culture camps, and that's how I became more involved with the Korean culture and Korean adoption community. It was directly through this friend of mine.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the importance of having that community and in your life? Like, did you find that was pivotal for being an adolescent and finally exploring your identity? Or do you think it wouldn't have really mattered?
I mean, I think, each adoptee is unique, just like every person is unique. Each adoptee, while we may have similar adoption stories, there are some similarities. And so I think, at least for me, though, as looking at myself as an adoptee and as a person of color, going through adolescence, it was very hard. I grew up in the Twin Cities here in Minnesota, so I was in a way blessed that I wasn't in a small rural town in Minnesota, just because as I was looking at my adolescence as myself and reflecting on who I was as an adoptee and as a person of color, I don't think that I really could put into words what I needed, but just being able to connect with everyone, whether it be people of color or other adoptees, it was really important to have those opportunities to be able to go to culture camps or be able to go to Korean dance, or just being able to interact with other adoptees. Just even if we didn't talk about adoption, it was just being able to be surrounded by people who knew what I was going through, or just knew if I was having a hard day. I went to a rather small private Catholic school, The majority of people were white. And so just by going there, race wasn't talked about very much, and so you still really stood out a lot. And then, especially having the name that I do, you then especially did you especially stood out. And then you have the questions of, oh, why do you have that name? And then if my parents ever came to, whether it be a soccer game or conferences, it was, oh, you're Christine's parents, and then having those questions. So really having those opportunities to connect, it really was important for me. Um, and and still to this day, it still is really important for me to have that community of transracial adoptees in general, just to have that support.
Do you feel like that is part of the reason why you got into the work that you do? Because I know, can you please tell me a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So what I did was I founded an organization called Adoptee Bridge in 2017, and we provide post-adoption support services for transracial adoptees and their families. And I really do think that in part it had to do with my own personal experience. Um, well, I did find support through the community, through my friends and whatnot. What I did later on in life was I started working at a rather large adoption agency. And just by doing the work there and just seeing the services that they offered, I really did see that there is a need to have more adoptees in this work, providing more services for our community of adoptees, because I really do think that it's important to have more adoptees in this work. I know that personally, I feel more comfortable talking to adoptees about my experiences, um, whether it be just, hey, I'm having a hard time talking to my mom or my dad about this adoption related thing, or everything from I miss my birth country to, harder topics like racism, trying to talk to my friends about being a person of color, but my name doesn't match my face, things like that. So that's all those experiences, really just packed all in one, is really the reasons why I formed Adoptee Bridge, is to provide post-adoption support services for adoptees by other transracial adoptees.
Yeah, I definitely think that type of work is so important, and I feel like there's not many places that provide a lot of post-adoption supports, and especially by adoptees, because one of the things that we talk about a lot in the adoption community is, like, adoptees understand what it's like to be an adoptee. So when you're having trainings led by other adoptees, it's easier to relate, and I feel like it has a better impact than trainings not really run by um, non-adoptees.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
um, can you tell me a little bit about searching for birth family and reunion? Your adoption was closed, right? In the beginning?
Right. So similar to a lot of Korean adoptees, my adoption was, using the word closed. You have maybe 2.5 pages of information, and maybe out of those 2.5 pages, you have a paragraph of information. The majority was on my birth mother, and I know when I started, when I was a teenager and I started exploring my Korean identity more, I would read that one paragraph over and over and over again, and just try to memorize all the details. But a paragraph isn't that
No, it's
much.
not.
A paragraph, no, it's not. Um, and then the rest of the document was just check up information, like, oh, she's a healthy baby, and here's her height and weight, and she sleeps this much and whatnot. But really, that was it. I was fortunate to have a name, names of both birth parents. I know that not all adoptees are fortunate to have that information, but in Korea, names are very common.
Mm,
Their names are very common, like Kim, Lee, Park, Chung. My last name is Chung. Those are very common last names, and so really, with a name, it's so hard just to find anyone.
yeah.
It's like it's like Johnson or Smith here in the United States. Um, and really, again, growing up, I never thought about searching. I never thought about connecting with my birth family. Still to this day, my family is my family here in the United States. But again, as I connected with more adoptees, you always have this little wondering of who I look like. And also, as I grew up, I began to have more medical problems. And so, again, as doctors ask you, do you have family medical? Yeah. And so I just recently the other day, like, do you have a family medical history? And it's just, nope. You bring up the A word, it's like, I'm adopted. And, oh, really? Over and over and over again. And so that's really, really why, just like the questions of who do I look like, and then also medical information. And also just to let, especially my birth mom, know that I'm okay, to let her know that I'm okay, and, that I was placed with a good family, and, that I'm alive. So those are really the reasons why eventually I decided that I did kind of want to search. And so that's why I did. It was somewhat, again, when you're a transnational adoptee, a lot of times you're working with agencies where the social workers may not have English as a first language. And so with that, there may be miscommunication, there may be mistranslation, and so that's what happened with my situation.
Oh no.
There was a little bit of miscommunication, mistranslation. So at first it was just, I have a letter, I want to put it in my file, just in case somebody comes forward and asks about me. I want them to know I'm okay. But that was misinterpreted as, hey, send this letter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, send this letter. And so yeah, that was a big oops. I mean, in the end, it all worked out fine, but yeah, that was a big, yeah.
So did they know where your birth mom was? Were they able to send it and actually received by her?
So they did need to search. They didn't need to do an official search. And unfortunately, and this is where, when I work with adoptees, I make sure that they are prepared, that they have a good support system, and that they have thought about this. Because again, for me, I had thought about searching, but I hadn't thought about searching. And it was on my second trip to Korea, and it was like, hey, here's a letter. So I really make sure the adoptees I work with, they're ready to search. Because in my situation, unfortunately, I found out my birth mother had passed away.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and this news wasn't something I had expected. And for a lot of adoptees, you have this picture in your mind of, oh, maybe she won't be open to meeting, maybe they won't be able to find her. But especially for adoptees like myself, where a birth mother was fairly young when she had me, just finding out that she had passed away. So I was, I think, 17 years old when I found out that news. And she had passed away years prior. Was really shocking. And we're also really scary just to know that news. Is it hereditary? Could it be something that I could have?
Yeah.
So it just brought on more and more questions. And again, I was not prepared for that, because again, it started out with, hey, put this letter in my file.
Yeah.
And it resulted in, oh, sorry, but we found out that your birth mother died.
Search and reunion is very complicated. Like, I feel like all the time in the media, like, we just see like people on TV shows like, oh, we found your mother, and like there's two people hugging and crying, and then it fades to black, and then we don't really see what goes on afterwards. So I know for me, like, I know you mentioned medical history, like that was my big reason to search. Like, when I was younger and I first found out that I was adopted, like I really wanted to search to kind of have that biological connection. But then as I got older, I was like, you know what? I don't know if I'm really ready for that type of relationship. But I had a lot of medical issues, so that was like my pushing factor. And I had two sons, and my eldest son, he was having some issues too. And I was just like, I need some type of information. And I went into it more prepared than I was the first time that I had searched, because the first time I searched, I was able to find some siblings that were adopted into a different family in the States, and then that was way more complicated than I expected. So the second time going around, like, I really prepared for it. Like, I'd been in therapy for a while, and I made sure to talk about it with my therapist and make sure I was mentally prepared for all the possible situations. And I feel like that's something that more adoptees need to do, because it's so emotional just on a normal day, but then you can add in a million different other factors that can make it even more difficult as well as wonderful. So it's a lot.
Exactly. And I think you bring up an excellent point about the media and what's shown on TV and everyday life. And a lot of times you only hear of the good stories. You hear of the happy reunions and the rainbow and butterfly stories. And that doesn't happen the majority of times, sadly. And a lot of times with adoptees I work with, I say, I really wish it could be rainbows and butterflies all the time, but unfortunately, it's not. I wish I could give you a rainbow every time, but it's kind of like the
Yeah.
weather. You only see a rainbow every once in a while, and that's what the media shows is just the random rainbow stories. And um, I sadly do think that, a lot of adoptees do have really, really high expectations. They do think, oh, my story and my reunion is going to end like this. But in reality, it may not. Even if a birth mother or birth parent, we can't forget about birth fathers.
Yes.
Um, um, they may not be ready to meet, and they may not be ready to meet. They may say that they don't wish to have contact, and then of course, in this day and age with DNA, if somebody requests a DNA test, they may not be a DNA match, and so having all of these different potential outcomes, it's really hard to think of them all. And so when I look back at my 17-year-old self, I always think, gosh, would I have been able to process all of those potential outcomes? And the answer is no, no. I wouldn't have even thought of all those potential outcomes. And maybe that's why I just said, hey, put this letter in my file, because I knew that there were potentially more outcomes that I wasn't ready for. But again, just the outcome of hearing that my birth mother had passed away, that was something that I had never even thought of. It wasn't ever on my radar.
Yeah, and that can be so painful and a lot for someone to just deal with. And I think for me, the hardest part of finding my birth mother was realizing that she went on to have a whole other family after me. And she had been married for like 25 years. She had several other children that she kept and raised, and now has grandchildren. And at first she was kind of really hesitant to even admit that she was my birth mother, because I found her through an investigator. And then so it's like dealing with all different layers of trauma on her end, and I guess shame. And it's just like, when you think about finding your birth mom, I don't know, like, I pictured finding someone who looks like me and then finally having that connection and be able to talk to them. And the reality is, like, for a lot of international adoptees, we often don't even speak the same language. And so every conversation I've had has been through a translator, and she ends up crying hysterically. And I just, a lot of times, like, I don't even know what to tell her, except for, like, I know you did your best and you had your reasons, but it's just a reminder of the trauma that there is in adoption. And I'm glad that more people are speaking openly about it, because it can prepare other adoptees for what may happen and what they might have to face.
Exactly. Yeah, and you bring up an excellent point just with the language of especially transnational adoptees. And if somebody is found, which again, I always hope that somebody is found, that's just a reality is if somebody is found and they want to be open to meeting, how do you communicate with them? I mean,
Yeah.
even through letters, At Adoptee Bridge, we translate letters actively for a lot of Korean adoptees. We support all transracial adoptees, but for a lot of Korean adoptees, we have lots of translators who can do Korean to English and English to Korean. And that's just something so many adoptees, I mean, not even just the Korean adoptees say, but how do we take Spanish lessons? How do we take Chinese lessons? Because they want
Yeah.
to be fluent. And it's just a reminder of another loss that we have as adoptees, because several of us were under the age of 5 when we were adopted. And,
Yeah.
boom, there goes the language. And it's so hard for us to pick it up as adults.
Yeah. And there's like this emotional aspect to learning another language too. Like I feel like there's a block like of shame that every time I try, like I'm just embarrassed. Like I feel like I should know this language, and then like learning a new language or learning something new is you always stumble and you're gonna make mistakes, but it's just like I can't get over it quite yet. And I know for other adoptees they've experienced similar things, and others don't have quite as big of a problem, but it, like you said, it's another layer. Which brings me back to you traveling to Korea. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Right. So I first traveled to Korea. So shortly after I met my friend when I started high school, she talked all about Korea and everything, and then I kind of got the Korea bug because then I wanted to do everything Korea. And I think it was maybe 2 years later, I decided, hey, I really want to go to Korea. And my parents have always told my brother and I. So my brother is also adopted. So when I say adopted into an all-white family, so it's our parents and then my brother and me. So they've always told us, whenever you're ready to go to Korea, we'll take you. And then we just never were ready. And I probably didn't, in a way, when I look back at it, I probably may have been a little interested just because I love traveling. I may have been interested earlier, but I just wanted to be my brother's mini me, and he didn't want to do anything related to Korea. So obviously, I didn't. And so I think my junior year of high school, I went back for the first time with my parents in a really small group. And that was just an amazing experience. But again, when looking back, I really don't feel like I was fully prepared for the emotions that come when visiting birth country. I mean, yes, it was fun. Yes, we did things like shopping and we ate food. It was amazing just being able to call it food in Korea. You don't call it Korean food, you call it food. But just some of the emotions that just would just hit me just at random times. I know I would be walking through a market or walking through the subway station, and then this was before I had the search, and I use search in quotations because again I didn't officially request a search. And I would think, I wonder if somebody walking by is related to me. Could that be my mom? Could that be my dad? And so many emotions too. Just I don't speak that language. Why is everybody just looking at me? Do they know that I'm an American? Do they know I'm adopted? And then just doing things that are related to adoption, like visiting a baby's home and holding a baby that I felt looked exactly like me. Because I had really spiky hair when I was a baby, and this baby just had the exact same hair as me, and just the emotions that went through me. I went, well, I was here, I was in this baby's home, and this baby is just kind of like the representation of me. So I was not ready for those emotions, and then that was in country. And then, again, it was fun. I still loved being there. And then going home, though, I had just another huge wave of emotions. It was just a whole nother form of grief and loss, and that just hit me. I mean, I got on the plane and immediately in a way, looking back, I felt internally like I was panicking. It was, when am I going back to Korea? In a way, it was trying to process, like, well, I was a baby once getting on this plane, not knowing what was going on, and now I actually do know
Yeah.
what's going on. And then once I did get back to Minnesota, I became physically sick. And I know my parents thought, oh, well, maybe it's like a travel bug. Maybe she picked up something on the plane. But I really do think it has to do with me grieving. It has to do with grieving, leaving my birth country
Yeah.
again, because I became physically sick for about 2 weeks. Um, and it was me grieving the loss of leaving Korea again.
I can't even imagine. My husband and I have been thinking about traveling to Colombia a lot recently. Like, obviously before COVID, but eventually when everything's, safe to do so. And I'm really nervous about the experience, and I'm nervous about experiencing a lot of the things that you just discussed. And I really feel like I understand why you got sick. Sorry, there's a fly. And
Mhm.
and
That's okay.
like, I don't know, it's kind of good to hear someone else who had gone through it. And I know you've been back, right, since that first time. Did you
hmm
find that you were
hmm
more prepared to deal with those types of emotions the second time around?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been back several times since that first trip. That and
Oh,
then I actually
wow.
went back the next year. Yeah, and it really was. I really felt
Mhm.
that I had to go back. It wasn't just like, oh, it would be fun. It was, I have to go back. I have to go back to Korea. I have to. It was just this huge, deep longing. Um, and that being said, is I know I can never live there. I can't live there permanently, but I have to always just have some kind of connection, physical connection to Korea. So the next year I did go back again with another small group, and that time I do remember it was less emotional, just because I knew what to expect. I knew that, hey, people are going to look like me, but again, I'm not going to actually look like them because I'm going to speak English. I'm going to dress differently.
Yeah.
My mannerisms are American. Um, people can tell that I'm American even though I have a Korean face. And I'm going to be okay with that. I mean, some adoptees aren't, but for me, I had a whole year to process that. And also, I went back with some really good friends of mine, and we just had fun. I mean, we just had a really fun time, just again, eating food and exploring. And they went back for their first time, and I went back for my second time. And um, it was fun. And then returning back to the US, it was still hard, but
Mhm.
I had the comfort of knowing I can always go back. I mean, I just
Yeah.
came back from returning. So I had the peace of mind of knowing I can always go back and Korea will always be there for me. So it was an easier trip than that first time.
I like that. Korea will always be there for me. Like that.
Mhm.
I feel like as adoptees we're so used to loss that
Mm.
we have a lot of fear that we're just not going to get the chance to do the things that we want and connect the way we desire to our birth country and our birth family. But I feel like we need to remind ourselves that it's okay to do it at your own pace because it's going to be there,
Yep.
and we can do it in little steps and we'll get there, and it just takes a little more effort than other people, and that's okay.
Mhm.
And I'm just kind of curious, like, how your relationship with your parents is, and like, were you able to discuss these feelings when you were going back and forth and with your family? Did they understand?
Yeah, so I know that the first trip to Korea, I can't remember anything about us talking about Korea. I remember us talking about, hey, we're going to Korea and we're going to have a lot of fun. And I know I wanted to meet my foster mom. So um, we talked a little bit about, um, me putting together a photo album for that. And other than that, I don't remember us talking too much about us getting ready for Korea. I do know that they, as we've reflected afterwards, they've said that it was really neat seeing me in Korea because they really do feel like when I'm here in America, I'm always so tense. I'm always like, I hold my posture a certain way, and it's just like a really tense, I don't know. That's according to my parents. And they said that in Korea, I think it was on one of the first days, they said that they saw me in a different light. They just saw me in a more relaxed light. They said it seemed like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, and they said it was really cool to see that. Um, and they said it was just they hadn't expected that. They hadn't expected to see me feel so relaxed. Whereas for me, I was thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to respond to people if they talk to me in Korean? And I felt really tense inside. But they were saying that they saw me really relaxed. And so, yeah, I mean, and then, we talked during the trip, and we obviously, but I don't remember us doing any other like huge reflections before or after. And then I know the second trip, I just went back with my mom. It was kind of like a mother-daughter trip. And on that trip, I know that we had some really tense interactions, even though it was a really fun trip for me. Even though it was a really fun trip for me, I also spent more time in a baby's home volunteering. And I think just for me internally, as I look back at it, it was really hard for me because I was around all these babies who, like me at one point, were in this baby's home, had no direct one-on-one care. And, all these babies, I think it was maybe about 30 to 40 babies, they were in the situation of being so young and had already suffered so much loss and trauma. And they were anywhere from 1 day to 2 weeks old. And that was really eating away at me. And I think, again, my teenage self wasn't able to process that. But looking at it now, I think that's what was really eating away at me. And so that's probably why it was so tense, why my mom and I had so many tense moments, in addition just to being a teenage girl and mom interactions. But then afterwards, we've talked a little bit about it. But since then, I've traveled to Korea multiple times, but my parents unfortunately haven't. They want to, but they just haven't had the opportunity to.
Yeah. I just can't even imagine being in a room full of babies like that. And I can just like feel the pain. Like every time I think about myself in the orphanage for like 5 months, like I feel so bad for myself and other babies and other adoptees who had to go through that. And especially as a mom now, because for your entire pregnancy, I don't know if you have kids, but usually you hear from like the gynecologist and doctors and studies and books. It's just like, oh, bonding with your baby, it's so important, it's so essential for brain growth. Oh, one-on-one contact, breastfeeding, this and that. And it's just like all like this is repeated so many times, and we're told how important it is once you become a mother yourself. But then as an adoptee, we're kind of just not told anything about that, and that type of mindset is pushed aside because it's like, oh, you should just be happy with your adopted family, forget about all that, it's not so important.
Right.
And the thing is, it is important, and it makes it complex. And that's what I can't help thinking when you bring up the baby home. But now that you're working with like post-adoption and preparing other adoptees, what are your biggest, tools that you try to teach adoptees before they consider taking a trip home to their birth country?
I think a lot of it just has to do just have a really good support network. And at Adoptee Bridge, we have discussion groups. We have discussion groups for adult adoptees, and we have discussion groups for adoptive family members, not just adoptive parents, but spouses, partners of adoptees, siblings of adoptees. So, you can come to one of those, Or, I mean, you
Yeah.
can just have a good circle of friends, or have a cousin or whatnot, but just have a really good support network, that you can talk to. And then ideally, one of those people in your support network will go with you to your birth country.
Hmm.
Just because you go to your birth country and you go through so many things. I mean, whether it be, oh, seeing, all the raw fish at the in the Busan fish market,
Yeah.
or you try on hanbok, or you try all the different foods, or you visit your adoption agency. um, all these things you experience, and you want somebody to be there with you, so once you return home, you can be able to process it with them, rather than having to tell everybody, oh, this is what I did and this is what I did. And a lot of people are going to say, how was your trip, how was your trip? And that's great, but at the same time, if you're not able to be able to say, oh, do you remember what happened here, oh, do you remember what happened here, it's going to be really, really draining, not being able to relate to someone, um, and have them say, like, yeah, I know, I remember that, yep, I remember what happened on day 3, I remember what happened when we visited the orphanage, I remember what happened when you reviewed your adoption file. And it's, in some ways, it's a sense of loneliness, if you don't have someone travel with you, because you don't have that support, later on when you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
process after the tour. And I think a lot of a tour or visiting a birth country, whatnot, and I think a lot of times people don't realize the emotions that come after visiting your birth country, because those can be very powerful. Again, I was physically sick, um, but the emotions that can come up, the sense of loss, the questions that can come up, those are very, very powerful. And I think while we try to prepare as much ahead of time, and you have the excitement, and then obviously the logistics of what to pack, am I going to like it there? What's the weather going to be like? A lot of times people just push aside the emotions that come afterwards, because they're just getting ready and they're so excited for, boom, the trip. But then afterwards, I
Yeah.
mean, the afterwards is going to, it could potentially be your whole entire life. So you do need to prepare for that as well. And that's why I definitely, suggest having that good support network, but then especially saying at least one of those people in your support network should travel with you. But that being said, I mean, if you go with a tour group, and I mean, I'm not trying to promote going with either our tour, Adoptee Bridge's tour, or another tour, you can, make a really good support network within a tour group, or you may make friends when you go to your birth country, and they can be a good support network as well.
Mm-hmm.
But just having a good support network in general.
Yeah. Um, do you just do tours for Korea, or do you do other countries as well?
As of right now, only Korea, but we hope, to start doing tours, to other countries in the near future. But we got to start small. We're
Yeah.
only in our 3rd year, so we got to
Yeah,
start
yeah,
small with Korea. But hopefully, in the near future, we can start expanding to other countries.
definitely. Um, Another thing that I'm wondering is a lot of adoptees that I know, especially transracial adoptees, we often grow up in primarily white towns. So we don't really have a lot of racial mirrors in our day to day lives. And
Mhm.
so when you went back to Korea and all of a sudden you're surrounded by people that look like you, how did that feel?
It was very interesting. At the same time, it was a little disappointing. But I have to admit, it was a little disappointing. So I'd say, an average height Korean. I'm 5'4". Here in Minnesota, people would look at me and go like, "Oh, you're kind of tall for an Asian." I don't know, but I feel like I'm average height. But in Korea, I'm an average height Korean. But I am bigger built. I am bigger built, and I've always been self conscious of that. And I've always known that I'm not the really skinny, petite Asian that a lot of people think is the stereotype. Like, oh,
Yeah.
very dainty, very petite. And I've always been very self conscious of that, not only here in the United States, but then when I went to Korea, it was even more obvious, because in Korea, body image and weight and appearance is very, very, um, just something very, not only talked about, but something that's criticized a lot.
Mhm.
So I was very self-conscious, not primarily on the first trip back, but on other trips back. Very, I've been, it's been, people have been very, I'd say, very outspoken about my appearance.
Mm.
So I'd say that the first trip back, though, when I tried to see people that looked like me, again, I'd feel like I was a lot bigger than everyone else. And that was back in the day when I was like really, really skinny compared to now.
Yeah.
And I felt like, wow, I don't look like any of you. I can't, even back in that day, it was hard for me to find clothes that I wanted to fit in. Because, being a teenager, just trying to find the clothes I wanted to fit into. Um, and then I was a soccer player and coached soccer and whatnot. So I was always in the sun. So my skin was really dark,
Oh
and
yeah.
Koreans love the light skin. So I do know that back then they were a little critical of my darker skin color, even though I went in the springtime. And so just finding like a makeup tone that fit my skin tone. And so I do know I was a little bit disappointed just because it was very hard to find, like clothes and, finding the right makeup. And
Yeah.
then um, at the same time, I mean, yeah, on fast glance, everybody was Asian, but it was a little bit disappointing because it was, I felt like everybody did look kind of uniform,
Yeah.
and that was another way that I felt like I stood out as an American.
I'm so glad that you shared that, because I think that a lot of us, if we were just going on a trip, we wouldn't really prepare for those types of things, if we didn't really sit down and actively try to learn and prepare. But like a lot of other countries, they do have like stereotypes of like Americans, and then when we're supposed to be part of like the birth culture, and yet we were raised American, that leads to like a layer of complication that can be difficult to deal with emotionally. And
Mm-hmm.
so I can totally see like going back to Colombia and not fitting in, and like being sized like an American and having all these American mannerisms like would be something that makes me stand out, and not necessarily in a good way, and that can
Mm-hmm.
be a lot to deal with. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm glad you brought that up. It's just like just thinking about these things, I'm just like, wow, it's a lot. It's a lot for adoptees to deal with, and I find it so amazing how you were able to adjust and
Mm-hmm.
absorb all that information at a
Yeah.
young age. Like you were visiting back when you were only 17. That's really young. And I'm 27 and I can't even still wrap my head around it. Um, so thank you for sharing that. I guess my other question would be is if you have any advice for potential adoptive
Ooh,
parents or current
advice.
adoptive
Oh, where to
parents,
start?
about some of the topics that we talked about today.
Oh, so many. I'd say, I mean, a few things. One is just, I know that there are a lot of adoptive parents out there who are looking for resources that they'd like to introduce to their children about their birth culture, or they'd like for their child to go to a certain camp. But I use this based off of my own experience, and um, I know that if my mom or dad had said, "Hey, go to this Korean camp," when I was 10 years old, I'm very stubborn. Uh, I would have said no, and I know that if they had pushed and pushed, um, I
Mm,
I probably would not be where I am today, and I probably would not be in the post-adoption work I am in. That I do today, that I love. I probably would not have visited Korea at all, um, because my parents pushed it so much. So really listen to your child. That being said, there's also some kids who just always say like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. But there also are some children who deep down inside are not, they're not ready. I mean, as you mentioned, some people, they're 27 or they're 47 and they haven't returned to their birth country, and that's
mhm.
okay. Every adoptee, they take things at a different age, and if you introduce things too early or too fast, it may make them push it away, and it may take them longer to welcome something into their lives. So really listen to your child, really take it at their pace. So that's one.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is that when it comes to searching, again, it should be your child. It should be your child's decision. Um, I know that some parents, they are really curious, and they really want to search on behalf of their child. But again, if your child isn't ready, if your child isn't showing that interest, don't just go ahead and search. It's, again, your child. It's the adoptee's choice, because we haven't had a choice in anything, in our adoption, in any, anything of the adoption process. So the least that we can do is have the choice for searching. So that's another thing for the search process.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is that, when your child is ready to, embrace their culture, embrace, going back to their birth country to search, support them. And if your child wants them to come, with them to their birth country, go with them. Or if they say, no, I really just want to take this trip with my friend, don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. Again, each adoptee, inside we process things on our own, and maybe they just want to, maybe they'll take you in 2 or 3 years, but don't take it personally.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't plan your own, rogue trip to coincide with your child's trip. That would definitely, build some fires between you and your child. So there's that. And then a fourth thing, I had 3, but now I have 4, is I know there's a lot of parents, they call me, they're looking for resources. And a lot of them, it's great, they're looking for resource. And so, when I consult with them, they say, oh, we're looking for a therapist for our 12-year-old. And I go, oh, okay. And, tell me more. And they may say, like, oh, well, our 12-year-old, we have a 12-year-old daughter from Ethiopia, and she was 5 when she was adopted. So we're looking for a Black female therapist who lives in Virginia, who specializes in blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And they are so, so specific. So my advice is, don't narrow down all of your specifications, whether it be for therapy, whether it be for other post-adoption programming, because sometimes that perfect resource isn't out there. So you have to broaden your horizon. And it's great you're trying to find that perfect resource for your child. It really, really is. It's really great you're trying to advocate for your child, but sometimes that perfect resource isn't there. So again, broadening your horizon and seeing, what else can we provide our child? Can we provide our child with an adoption competent therapist that is an adoptee, that, does specialize in XYZ, but they may not fit all of the boxes? Because all too often I see people just go, oh, they don't fit all the boxes, or, oh, this program doesn't fit all the boxes. Okay, bye-bye. And they write too many programs or too many therapists off. So there's that. So I think I have more, but those are the 4 that I'm going to talk about now. Yeah.
Yeah. I love them, honestly. I think they're all very helpful, and I think your last point, your 4th point, was especially relevant, because, like, a lot of us, we're trying to find, like, the perfect fit, like you said. But when it comes to services with adoption, like, there's not a huge pool of endless resources where you can pick and choose and find the perfect one. Now, ideally, you should try to get the most relevant and the one that you think will be the most beneficial. But I do feel like adoptive parents should be willing to, test other programs that they might not have considered as their first choice, because you can find very good programs that are run by adoptees, like mentorship programs by adoptees that aren't necessarily therapists. There's like groups that you could find for your child to join, and like all these different options are now available that weren't back in the day. That doing a little digging and just saying like, oh, you can't find the best fit does not mean you should give up. So I think that's important to note. But yeah, I am super glad that we had this chat today, and I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot of things, and I hope you enjoyed your time with me.
No, definitely. This was a lot of fun. It was great chatting with you. Thank you so much for having me
today. And if you would like to hear more from Adoptee Thoughts, make sure to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you'd like to learn more about me, you can check out my website, adopteethoughts.com. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.